The first glance that changed. Everything Olivia Hart had always believed that ordinary days built extraordinary futures, yet every sunrise lately had begun to feel exactly the same. The alarm clock's sharp ring at 6:30, the half-burned toast eaten on her way out the door, the silent elevator rides up to the 15th floor of Cross Financial Group, all of it repeated like a song stuck on a single verse. The marble floors beneath her heels gleamed so perfectly that she could see her reflection as she walked, but even her own face looked tired of being careful. At 29, Olivia carried the kind of quiet exhaustion that came from living responsibly, the kind that hid behind polite smiles and well-pressed suits. She was competent, efficient, invisible. An assistant who made other people's lives easier while secretly wondering when hers would begin. The company itself was a monument to precision. Every desk aligned with military order, every conversation measured in low tones of purpose. The smell of fresh coffee and printer ink filled the air as the morning rush began. Olivia moved through the rhythm automatically, checking schedules, confirming meetings, typing reminders, and organizing presentations for people who barely remembered her name. It wasn't resentment that lived in her. It was something softer, something like quiet disappointment that this was all there was. She had dreamed once of traveling the world, maybe opening a small art cafe near the Seine. But reality had replaced dreams with deadlines, and then, as the elevator doors opened on the executive floor, he appeared again, Daniel Cross. The name alone carried weight in the building. The man himself carried silence like armor. At 35, he had already turned Cross Financial into one of the most respected consulting firms in the city. When he passed through the corridor, time seemed to fold itself around his presence. Conversations hushed, chairs straightened, even the air felt charged. Olivia had seen him a dozen times, but each encounter left the same quiet shiver along her skin. Not from attraction alone, but from the overwhelming certainty that he belonged to a world far beyond hers. His eyes were the color of steel tempered by shadow, focused yet distant, and when they glanced her way for the briefest second, it felt as if he saw every thought she was trying to hide. "Good morning, Miss Hart," his voice carried, smooth and precise, as he passed her desk. "Good morning, Mr. Cross," she answered automatically, but he was already gone, the sound of his footsteps fading toward his corner office overlooking the skyline. She tried to shake it off, forcing herself back into her routine, yet her heartbeat refused to settle. Daniel Cross was not just a boss. He was a mystery wrapped in discipline. Nobody gossiped about him. Nobody dared. But Olivia had caught glimpses of the man beneath the perfection. The rare evenings when the lights in his office burned long after everyone left. The faint dark circles beneath his eyes some mornings. The way his jaw clenched when he thought no one was watching. There was a loneliness in him that mirrored her own, though she would never admit it aloud. By noon, her friend Sophie's message lit up her phone screen like a spark in the monotony. "Coffee after work? I have an idea that will change your life." Olivia smiled despite herself. Sophie's ideas usually flirted with disaster, but they always reminded her what excitement felt like. So, when the day finally ended and the office emptied into the hum of the city, she allowed herself to follow the scent of roasted beans and chatter into the crowded cafe. Sophie was already waving from a booth, her red hair blazing like a banner of rebellion against the gray suits surrounding them. "You look exhausted," Sophie announced as Olivia slid into the seat. "I am exhausted," Olivia admitted with a half-laugh. "Some of us have real jobs that don't come with brand sponsorships and travel blogs." "Please?" Sophie rolled her eyes playfully. "Being a social media influencer is work. You just don't understand creativity. Speaking of which, I have something that'll make your 30th birthday unforgettable. It's next week, and I'm still 29, Olivia corrected, though she already felt the trap closing. Details. "Listen, Liv, when was the last time you did something reckless? Not foolish, just alive?" Olivia frowned. "I don't do reckless. You know that." "Exactly my point." Sophie leaned in, grin widening. "So here's the deal. I'm paying for a 2-week trip to Paris. First class, beautiful hotel, dinners, the works." Olivia blinked. "What's the catch?" Sophie's grin turned devilish. "You have to kiss your boss. That cold, gorgeous statue you work for. A real kiss. And record his reaction. Olivia nearly dropped her cup. You've lost your mind. I could get fired. No, sued. Sophie, that's not a game. It's not a lawsuit, it's a story, Sophie argued. You always say you feel invisible. Well, nothing wakes you up like doing something unpredictable. When was the last time your heart beat fast for anything other than caffeine? Olivia wanted to protest, to point out how absurd it sounded. But the question sank deep. When had she last done something that made her heart race? College, maybe, when she'd turned down a safe accounting job to chase a startup dream that had crashed within months. Since then, she'd promised herself no more risks, no more heartbreak, only control. And in exchange, she had built a life that looked perfect, but felt empty. I'll think about it, she murmured. Don't think too long, Sophie said softly. Life doesn't wait for people who play it safe. That night, Olivia lay in bed staring at the city lights blinking outside her window. The idea was ridiculous, childish, impossible. Yet the more she tried to dismiss it, the more it whispered to her restless soul. One moment of courage, one small rebellion against the ordinary. By Sunday, the whisper had grown into a heartbeat she could no longer ignore. She typed the message before she could talk herself out of it. I'll do it. The following morning felt different from every Monday before. The air seemed heavier, charged with some secret she carried alone. She replayed the plan in her mind. Not really a plan, just the terrifying possibility that at some point today she would cross a line she could never uncross. Daniel was in meetings most of the morning, and each passing hour both relieved and tortured her. By the time the afternoon light slanted across the glass walls, half the office had gone home early for the long weekend. Daniel stepped out of the archives carrying a folder, sleeves rolled up, expression focused. For the first time, she noticed how human he looked without his usual perfection. A few strands of hair falling loose, the faint shadow of stubble softening his jaw. He looked up, surprised to find her standing there. Miss Hart, did you need something? Her voice caught in her throat. Words fled. There was only the sound of her own pulse echoing in her ears. If she hesitated, she would lose the courage forever. So before reason could intervene, Olivia took one step forward, another, and then, with trembling hands, lifted herself on her toes and pressed her lips against his. It lasted no more than a heartbeat, yet the world seemed to pause. Daniel froze, eyes widening, the folder slipping slightly in his grasp. When she pulled back, breathless and terrified, the silence that followed felt endless. What do you think you're doing? His voice was calm but laced with steel, a dangerous quiet that made her knees weak. I don't know, she stammered. I just needed to feel something different. Daniel's gaze flicked down the corridor. It was empty, yet his jaw remained tight. This is inappropriate, he said finally. Unacceptable. I know, she whispered. If you want me to resign, I understand. He studied her, expression unreadable. Seconds stretched before he spoke again. My office now. Inside, he closed the door behind them, the sound echoing through the glass room. The city skyline burned gold in the distance as sunset reflected off the windows. Daniel moved behind his desk, putting the full width of polished wood between them. Explain yourself. Olivia swallowed hard, her heart still hammering. It was stupid. I wanted to do something spontaneous for once in my life, something that scared me. You chose this, he said flatly. I chose wrong, she admitted, her voice small. He sighed, the first crack in his control. Do you understand the position this puts me in? The company? You could file a complaint, someone could have seen. No one saw, she interrupted quickly. And it won't happen again. You have my word. Daniel turned toward the window, silent for a long moment. How old are you, Miss Hart? 29, she said quietly. 30 next week. He nodded slowly, as though something in that answer explained everything. You wanted to prove to yourself you could still take a risk before the next decade begins. Something like that, she admitted. Daniel turned back to her. I should fire you. That's what any reasonable CEO would do. Olivia's eyes burned. I know. "But I won't," he said softly, "because I understand that feeling. The need to break free before you forget what it means to live. My brother used to tell me the same thing before he died. He said I was working myself into a ghost." His voice faded for a moment, and Olivia caught the flicker of pain behind his calm. "I'm sorry," she said gently. He nodded once, then straightened, his walls sliding back into place. "You'll continue working here, but from now on you'll report directly to me. I want to make sure there are no further surprises. Understood?" "Yes, Mr. Cross," she breathed. As she left his office, relief and confusion tangled inside her chest. She had expected anger, punishment, humiliation, but instead he had given her something she didn't expect at all: understanding. And as the elevator doors closed, Olivia realized her world had already begun to shift. That night, she texted Sophie only 3 words: "I did it." Her friend's reply came instantly: "Paris, here you come." But Olivia barely smiled, because as she sat in her quiet apartment staring at the city lights again, she wasn't thinking about Paris anymore. She was thinking about the way Daniel Cross had looked at her, not with judgment, not even shock, but with a flicker of recognition, as if he, too, had been waiting for someone to wake him from the life he no longer knew how to escape. The walls began to crack. The following week brought changes Olivia could never have prepared for. On Monday morning, her desk was gone from its usual place among the rows of assistants, and in its place stood a simple message on company letterhead: "Report to Mr. Cross's office, effective immediately." Her hands trembled slightly as she read it. She knew this was no promotion. It was his way of keeping a closer eye on her after the impulsive act that could have ended her career. Still, the thought of sharing the same workspace as Daniel Cross every day filled her with a strange mixture of dread and fascination. She spent longer getting ready that morning, carefully brushing her hair and choosing a pale blue blouse that matched her eyes, as if the right color might hide her nervousness. When she entered his office, Daniel was already there, seated behind his vast desk with the skyline stretching endlessly behind him. Morning sunlight poured through the glass walls, turning the room into something out of a dream, or a warning. He looked up briefly, his eyes calm and unreadable. "Good morning, Miss Hart. You'll be working from here now. Your desk is over there." He gestured toward a smaller table near the window, neatly arranged with a computer, notepad, and stack of folders. Olivia nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, Mr. Cross." The first few days were suffocatingly quiet. Daniel was the kind of man who didn't waste words. He spoke only when necessary, always in that low, steady tone that carried authority without effort. Olivia found herself hyper-aware of every sound: the scratch of his pen, the rhythm of his typing, the soft click of his watch as he adjusted it absent-mindedly while reading reports. It was as if the silence between them had a pulse of its own. She tried to focus on her tasks, answering calls, reviewing schedules, and organizing client files. But her thoughts kept drifting back to that single moment, that forbidden kiss that neither of them ever mentioned again. Sometimes, when Daniel leaned back in his chair to think, Olivia would glance up and catch his reflection in the glass wall. He always looked so composed, but now that she was close enough to observe him for hours each day, she began to notice the subtleties: the faint lines of fatigue around his eyes, the way he rubbed his temple when he thought too long, the quiet sighs that escaped him when he believed no one was listening. The world saw Daniel Cross as a man carved from steel, but up close, she could see the small fractures beneath the surface. On Wednesday afternoon, while they worked through a series of financial projections, Daniel suddenly spoke without looking up. "Why did you choose accounting, Miss Hart?" The question startled her. He had never asked anything personal before. "I guess because it was safe," she said after a moment. "Numbers make sense. They're steady, predictable. I wanted stability." Daniel nodded slightly. "Safe," he repeated, as if tasting the word. "And is that what you wanted? Safety?" She hesitated, staring at the spreadsheet on her screen. "I thought it was what I wanted. Now I'm not so sure." He finally looked up, his eyes catching hers across the room. Most people live their entire lives chasing what they think they should want, not what they truly desire. You took a risk, Miss Hart, a foolish one perhaps, but at least it was honest. Olivia blinked, unsure whether to be offended or grateful. Are you complimenting me or insulting me? She asked softly. For the first time, she saw the faintest trace of a smile on his lips. Maybe both, he said. The small exchange changed something between them. After that, Daniel began speaking to her more often. Small conversations at first, about business or simple observations about the day. But soon they drifted into longer talks that stretched beyond the boundaries of professionalism. He asked about her family, her childhood, her dreams before she traded them for a desk and deadlines. Olivia found herself opening up in ways she hadn't expected. Telling him about her mother's small bakery, about how she used to draw sketches of city skylines as a teenager, believing she'd one day live somewhere filled with art and laughter instead of spreadsheets. In return, Daniel began to reveal fragments of his own life. His brother's name was Thomas, 2 years younger, a man full of wild ideas and endless laughter, the opposite of Daniel in every way. He had died in a car accident 3 years earlier, and since then, Daniel had buried himself in work, using success as a wall to keep grief from swallowing him whole. As he spoke, Olivia saw the humanity beneath the title, the raw sorrow he never allowed anyone else to see. One late evening, long after most of the staff had gone home, they sat together finalizing reports for an important client presentation. The city below glittered like a sea of stars, and the soft hum of rain against the windows filled the silence. Olivia's eyes were heavy with fatigue when Daniel suddenly said, almost to himself, "Thomas would have hated this office." She looked up, unsure what to say. "He used to tell me life isn't meant to be lived behind glass," he continued quietly. "He said success means nothing if you have no one to share it with." Olivia's heart tightened. "He sounds like he was a good person," she said softly. "He was better than I deserved," Daniel murmured. There was a pause, and then he turned his gaze toward her. "You remind me of him, you know. Not in appearance, but in the way you question things. The way you still look at life like it could be something more." Olivia felt warmth rush to her cheeks. "I don't know if that's a compliment either," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "It is," Daniel replied. For a long moment, they just sat there, the air between them thick with something unspoken. Not tension exactly, but the quiet awareness of two people beginning to see each other clearly for the first time. The next few weeks passed in a blur of deadlines and unexpected moments that blurred the line between professional and personal. Daniel grew gentler in tone, less distant. Sometimes he even laughed, a low, genuine sound that made Olivia's chest ache. One afternoon, when a sudden thunderstorm flooded the city and most employees rushed home early, Daniel insisted she wait out the weather in his office. They shared coffee by the window, while lightning painted silver streaks across the sky. "You don't talk much about yourself," she said after a while. Breaking the silence. "There isn't much to tell," he replied. "My life is this company. It's what I built after losing everything else." "Maybe that's the problem," Olivia said softly. "You built walls to protect yourself, but now they're keeping you alone." Daniel looked at her then, really looked at her, and something flickered in his eyes. Pain, surprise, maybe gratitude. "You speak as if you know something about loneliness," he said quietly. "I do," she admitted. "It's not always about being alone. Sometimes it's about feeling unseen, even when you're surrounded by people." He nodded slowly, his gaze never leaving hers. "Then we understand each other more than I thought." That night, Olivia went home, unable to stop thinking about the look in his eyes. For the first time, she realized that Daniel Cross, the man who seemed untouchable, was just as lost as she was, only in different ways. He had all the success the world could offer, yet behind his power lay a man still grieving, still searching for something real. And somewhere deep inside her heart, a dangerous warmth began to grow. The transformation was subtle at first. Daniel started asking for her opinion in meetings, trusting her with projects he once handled alone. He even thanked her once, a small gesture, but one that sent an unexpected thrill through her. He began to notice things too. When she changed her hairstyle, when she skipped lunch, when she looked tired. There were moments when their hands brushed while passing papers, moments that lingered just a second too long. Neither of them said anything, but the silence between them grew heavier, filled with everything they couldn't express. One Friday evening, as they prepared to leave the office, Olivia gathered the courage to speak. "Mr. Cross," she began, then hesitated when he turned toward her, waiting. "Daniel," she corrected softly. "I just wanted to say thank you for not firing me that day." He studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "Do you regret it?" he asked quietly. She took a deep breath. "No, I think that moment changed both of us, even if it was wrong." He exhaled slowly, then walked closer until he stood just a few feet away. "You're right," he said, his voice low. "It did." The air between them felt electric, fragile. For a heartbeat, it seemed as if the world outside had vanished. The city, the company, the rules. There was only the quiet rhythm of two hearts finding each other in the chaos of everything forbidden. But before either could move, Daniel stepped back, his composure returning. "Good night, Miss Hart," he said softly, though his eyes lingered longer than they should have. As Olivia left the office, rain began to fall again, soft and rhythmic. She tilted her head back to feel the drops on her skin, her heart filled with confusion and hope. She didn't know what this was becoming, love, redemption, or another mistake, but for the first time in years, she felt alive. And somewhere, behind the walls of glass high above, Daniel Cross stood at his window, watching her disappear into the rain, wondering when he had started to care about the woman who had once turned his perfectly ordered world upside down with a single, reckless kiss. The distance that pulled them closer, the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months. But the tension between Olivia and Daniel only grew stronger, pulsing quietly beneath the surface of their everyday interactions. It was a strange kind of closeness, the kind that was built not through words or touch, but through silence, shared glances, and the knowledge that something unspoken was slowly growing between them. They were both careful, both too aware of what was at stake, but no amount of caution could stop what was happening. There were moments when their eyes met across the office and the rest of the world simply faded away. In those fleeting seconds, Olivia felt as though they were speaking without language, connected by something fragile and dangerous that neither dared to name. Daniel had changed since that day. The once cold and distant CEO now carried a warmth that appeared only when she was near. He laughed more often, not the rehearsed kind of laughter used to fill silence in meetings, but genuine laughter that softened the sharp lines of his face. Olivia noticed it most in the mornings when she brought him his coffee. He would look up from his laptop, thank her, and smile. A small gesture, yet it was enough to make her heartbeat quicken. There were still boundaries between them, invisible but firm, and Daniel made sure they were never crossed. Yet those boundaries grew thinner every day, stretched by the quiet intensity that neither could escape. It was a late Thursday evening when everything began to change again. The office was quiet, emptied of the usual noise of conversations and ringing phones. Outside, the city glowed with the distant pulse of nightlife, but inside, the only sound was the soft tapping of rain against the windows. Olivia sat at her desk, reviewing the files Daniel had asked her to organize for a client presentation, while he stood by the window with a glass of water in hand, staring out at the city. The light from the desk lamps cast golden reflections on the glass, outlining his figure in soft shadows. "You should go home, Miss Hart," Daniel said quietly, not turning around. "It's late." "I don't mind staying," she replied softly, keeping her eyes on the papers in front of her. He turned then, studying her for a moment. "You've been staying late too often," he said. "You don't have to prove anything." "I'm not proving anything," Olivia said, finally meeting his gaze. "I just like being here." Her voice was honest, stripped of any pretense, and the words hung in the air longer than they should have. Daniel's expression softened slightly, his eyes reflecting a storm of thoughts he didn't dare voice. He placed the glass on the desk and walked toward her, slow and deliberate, every step measured. When he stopped beside her chair, the space between them felt charged with electricity. Olivia could feel the warmth radiating from him, the scent of his cologne mingling with the faint aroma of coffee and rain. "Do you ever think about that day?" he asked quietly. Her hands froze above the papers. "Which day?" she whispered, though she already knew what he meant. "The day you kissed me," he said, his voice barely above a breath. Olivia's heart pounded so hard, she thought he could hear it. "Sometimes," she admitted. "Not because of what happened, but because of what it changed." Daniel's jaw tightened. "It changed more than you realize." He turned away again, pacing slowly toward the window. "After that day, I started questioning everything. My work, my choices, even the way I live. I built this company to fill the emptiness left after my brother's death, but lately, it feels like I've just been hiding behind it." Olivia stood slowly, taking a few hesitant steps closer to him. "You're not the only one who's been hiding, Daniel. I spent years living safely, quietly, convincing myself that control meant happiness. But all it ever did was keep me numb. That one mistake, that one reckless thing, it woke me up." He turned to her then, his eyes dark and unreadable. "And what do you feel now, Olivia?" She swallowed hard, the words trembling on her lips. "Alive." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the rain sliding down the glass and the soft hum of the city below. Then, slowly, Daniel reached out, brushing a strand of hair away from her face. The touch was light, almost hesitant, as though he feared it would shatter the fragile line between them. "You shouldn't look at me like that," he said softly. "Like what?" she whispered. "Like you see something worth saving." Olivia's eyes glistened. "Maybe I do." He closed his eyes for a moment, fighting against the emotions that flickered through him. When he spoke again, his voice was strained, as if each word cost him something. "You deserve someone who can give you more than I can. I've spent so long being the man who feels nothing that I don't know if I even remember how to love properly." "Maybe love isn't about knowing," she said gently. "Maybe it's about feeling. Maybe it's about trying." Daniel looked at her for a long time, his expression unreadable, and then he stepped back, putting distance between them again. "This can't happen, Olivia," he said firmly, though his voice trembled with the effort of control. "You work for me. People talk. The world judges. I won't risk your reputation, or mine." Olivia nodded, though her throat felt tight. "I understand," she said quietly. "But understanding doesn't stop me from caring." He looked away, his hands clenching at his sides. "You should go home." She hesitated, then whispered, "Good night, Daniel," before turning and walking toward the door. But before she could leave, his voice stopped her. "Olivia," he said softly. She turned back, and for a moment the distance between them seemed to disappear. His eyes met hers, filled with something raw and unguarded. "Thank you," he said simply, "for reminding me what it feels like to be human." That night, Olivia couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw him, the loneliness in his eyes, the tension in his voice, the way he had said her name like it was something sacred. She knew what they were doing was impossible, that it could never become what her heart wanted it to be. And yet she also knew that something inside her had already crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. She wasn't just falling for her boss. She was falling for the man behind the title, the broken soul who had forgotten how to feel until she came along. The following morning, Daniel avoided her eyes during their meetings, his tone all business once more, as if nothing had ever happened. But Olivia could see through the mask. Every word he spoke, every look he tried to suppress, carried a weight that only she could understand. Their connection had become a secret language, one built from glances, pauses, and moments that lingered too long. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Daniel called her into his office. She expected another work discussion, but the look in his eyes told her otherwise. "There's a charity gala next week," he said finally. "The firm is one of the sponsors. I'll need you there to assist with the presentation materials." "Of course," she said, trying to keep her tone steady. He hesitated, then added quietly, It's formal. You'll need an evening gown. Olivia nodded, her heart fluttering for reasons she didn't dare acknowledge. When the night of the gala arrived, Olivia stood before her mirror in disbelief. Sophie had helped her choose a dress, a deep emerald gown that hugged her figure and shimmered softly in the light. Her hair cascaded in loose waves over her shoulders, and for the first time in years, she felt truly beautiful. At the event, the room was filled with laughter, music, and the clinking of champagne glasses. But the moment Daniel saw her, the noise around him seemed to fade. He was standing near the stage, dressed in a tailored black tuxedo, every inch the powerful man the world admired. Yet when his eyes met hers, something shifted. For a brief, suspended moment, the crowd vanished, and it was just the two of them, caught in a silence that said everything words could not. "You look," he began, then stopped, searching for the right word. "Different?" she teased softly. "Beautiful," he finished quietly. The evening unfolded like a dream, polite smiles, whispered conversations, and fleeting moments when their hands brushed as they moved through the crowd. It was dangerous, intoxicating, and entirely unlike anything Olivia had ever experienced. And when the night drew to a close, as the city lights sparkled beyond the tall windows, Daniel leaned closer and whispered, "Thank you for being here. I didn't realize how empty these events felt until tonight." Olivia smiled gently. Maybe they were waiting for the right company. For the first time, he didn't look away, and though they didn't touch, something inside both of them quietly gave in, a silent surrender to the truth that could no longer be denied. That night, long after Olivia had returned home, Daniel stood by his window staring at the stars. He thought about the woman who had walked into his world by accident, who had defied him with one impulsive act and somehow managed to rebuild his heart in the process. He knew it couldn't last, that the world they lived in was too fragile for something so dangerous. But for the first time in years, Daniel Cross allowed himself to dream, not of profits or power, but of a life where love didn't have to hide behind glass walls. The storm behind the glass. The days after the gala were different, though neither Daniel nor Olivia dared to speak about what had changed between them. Something had shifted that night, something delicate and undeniable. The air between them now carried an invisible electricity that lingered in every glance, every word, every shared silence. They had crossed no visible lines, yet they both knew that they stood at the edge of something dangerous, something that could destroy the very balance of their lives if it were ever to be exposed. The company remained the same on the surface: meetings, clients, deadlines, and strategy sessions. But beneath the polished calm, both of them were caught in the pull of an emotion they could no longer ignore. Daniel tried to bury himself in work, convincing himself that this was just an infatuation, a temporary distraction born from proximity and shared loneliness. But every time he looked up from his desk and saw Olivia concentrating on her computer, the faint crease of her brow, the quiet determination in her eyes, he felt something stir inside him that frightened him more than failure ever could. She wasn't like anyone he had ever met. There was no pretense in her, no ambition masked as affection, no interest in his wealth or power. She spoke to him as if he were simply a man. Not a boss, not a millionaire, not a figure admired and feared, but a man trying to find meaning again. And that made it impossible to stay detached. One rainy afternoon, while the thunder rolled softly in the distance, Olivia knocked on the glass door of his office. "You wanted to see me, Mr. Cross?" she asked, her voice calm, though her hands trembled slightly. He looked up, then motioned for her to come in. "Close the door, please." She obeyed, stepping inside as he leaned back in his chair, his eyes scanning the report on his desk but his mind clearly elsewhere. "I've been offered a position," he said finally, surprising her. Her heart skipped. "A position?" "In New York," he explained quietly. "A merger opportunity. It's a chance to expand the company internationally." Olivia hesitated, unsure what to say. "That's incredible news." "It should be," he said, but his tone was distant. "Except I can't seem to decide whether it's what I truly want anymore." The admission caught her off guard. Daniel Cross never sounded uncertain about anything. He was the kind of man who made decisions without hesitation, who lived in the clarity of logic. To hear doubt in his voice now made him seem almost vulnerable. "Why not?" she asked softly. He looked up, his gaze meeting hers. "Because leaving means losing something I didn't expect to find here." Her breath caught, and for a long moment, neither of them moved. The silence was filled with the sound of rain sliding down the windows, the steady hum of the world continuing beyond their fragile universe. Finally, Daniel stood, walking around his desk until he stood just inches away from her. "You've changed the way I see everything, Olivia," he said quietly. "I thought I understood my life, my purpose, but since you came into it, nothing feels the same. I'm no longer sure who I am without you in my days." Olivia's throat tightened. "Daniel." He reached out, gently taking her hand, his fingers warm against hers. "Tell me I'm not the only one who feels this." Her eyes shimmered as she whispered, "You're not." The confession hung between them like a fragile thread, and before either could think, Daniel leaned forward and kissed her. It wasn't the impulsive, reckless kiss of months ago. It was slower, deeper, filled with everything they had tried to suppress. For a moment, the world outside disappeared. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathless, shaken by the realization of what they had just done. "This can't happen," Daniel said softly, though his hands still lingered near her face. "It shouldn't." "But it already has," Olivia whispered, her voice trembling. He stepped back, running a hand through his hair. "If anyone finds out, they'll destroy you. They'll say you seduced your boss, that you used me for advantage. They won't see the truth." "And what is the truth?" she asked quietly. "That I'm the one who fell first," he admitted. Olivia's eyes filled with tears she couldn't hold back. "Then don't leave," she whispered. "Stay and let's figure this out together." But Daniel shook his head, torn between desire and duty. "I've spent my life protecting this company, Olivia. Every headline, every deal, every sacrifice, it all depends on my reputation. If I lose that, everything I've built crumbles. And if you're tied to me when it happens, it'll destroy you too." She stepped closer, her voice firm. "I don't care about the headlines or the whispers. I care about you." He looked at her, pain flickering across his face. "That's what terrifies me." For a long moment, they simply stood there, caught in the storm of emotions that neither could escape. Then Daniel turned away, his voice barely audible. "Go home, Olivia." She wanted to argue, to reach for him, but something in his tone told her not to. So she nodded silently and walked out, her chest aching as the rain outside mirrored the turmoil inside her heart. The following days were tense, filled with avoidance and stolen glances. Daniel threw himself into work again, hiding behind meetings and long hours, while Olivia forced herself to act as though nothing had happened. But beneath the surface, both were unraveling. The secrecy, the longing, the guilt, it all built like pressure beneath glass. It was on a Wednesday morning, while Olivia was delivering files to the legal department, that she overheard two employees whispering near the elevators. "Have you noticed how much time Mr. Cross spends with his assistant lately?" one murmured. "Some people say they've seen them having dinner outside the office." "That's impossible," the other replied. "He's too smart for that." Olivia's heart pounded as she walked past them, pretending not to hear. But that night, when she returned to her apartment, she found herself pacing restlessly. The world was already beginning to notice, and soon the whispers would turn into accusations. The next morning, Daniel called her into his office again. His expression was tight, his jaw set. "There's been talk," he said bluntly. "Someone in the firm is spreading rumors." Olivia felt her stomach twist. "I'm sorry. I never—" He raised a hand gently. "It's not your fault. But we need to be careful. I can't afford a scandal right now." The words hurt more than she expected. "So what are you saying? That we stop speaking altogether?" "I'm saying we need distance," he said reluctantly. At least for a while. The silence that followed was unbearable. Olivia nodded slowly, her voice barely steady. "Of course, Mr. Cross. Whatever you think is best." He flinched at the formality of her tone but said nothing. As she turned to leave, he said quietly, "Olivia, this isn't goodbye." She didn't look back. It feels like it. The days that followed were some of the hardest of her life. Working in the same office but pretending indifference was like living with a wound that refused to heal. Daniel avoided her eyes in meetings, spoke only in professional tones, and acted as though the moments between them had been erased. The distance cut deeper than anger ever could, and yet beneath all the restraint, she could still feel his gaze when he thought she wasn't looking, could still sense the pull of the connection that neither of them could sever. Then, one evening, everything collapsed. A journalist published an article online hinting at a personal relationship between the CEO of Cross Financial and a young female assistant. There were no names mentioned, but the details were obvious enough to ignite speculation. Within hours, the company was buzzing with gossip. Olivia's inbox filled with messages she couldn't bear to read, and Daniel's phone rang non-stop with calls from the board demanding answers. That night, Daniel called her into his office for the last time. He looked exhausted, the weight of the world etched into the lines of his face. "They're threatening to remove me from my position if this doesn't go away," he said quietly. Her throat tightened. "What can we do?" He looked at her, pain and resolve warring in his eyes. "You can resign!" The words hit her like a blow. "What?" "It's the only way," he said, his voice breaking. "If you step down, the story dies. They'll see it as a misunderstanding. You'll get a severance package, recommendations. You can start fresh somewhere new." Olivia shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. "You're asking me to walk away from you." "I'm asking you to save yourself," he said desperately. "Don't let my mistakes ruin your life." She took a step closer, her voice trembling. "And what about you? What happens to you when I'm gone?" He smiled sadly. "I'll survive. I always do." For a long moment she stared at him, the man who had been her boss, her confidant, her heartbreak. Then slowly she nodded. "If this is what you want, I'll go." When she turned to leave, Daniel whispered, "Olivia?" She stopped, her hand on the doorframe. "For what it's worth," he said softly, "you were the best thing that ever happened to me." She didn't reply. She couldn't. The tears blurred her vision as she walked down the hallway for the last time, past the desks, past the memories, past the life that had almost been. And as she stepped out into the cold night air, the rain began to fall once more, the same way it had the day they first crossed paths, the same way it always seemed to when their worlds shifted. That night, Daniel stood alone in his office, staring at the empty desk across from him. He had protected her from the scandal, but in doing so, he had destroyed the only light that had ever entered his life. For years, he had built his empire behind glass walls. Now, for the first time, he realized what true emptiness felt like. He whispered her name once into the silence, and it echoed back like a prayer he knew would never be answered. The love that wouldn't fade. Months slipped away like pages in a forgotten calendar, but the memory of what had been refused to fade. Olivia Hart left Cross Financial quietly, with no farewell party, no goodbyes, no explanations. Her resignation was accepted, her name quickly removed from the company directory, and within days it was as if she had never existed there at all. The building that once echoed with her footsteps now stood as a monument to everything she had lost. She tried to rebuild her life piece by piece, taking a new position at a smaller firm across town, one where her name meant nothing and her past wasn't whispered about in corridors. But every time she looked at her reflection in the office window, she saw the same tired eyes that had stared at Daniel's the night she walked away. There were mornings she woke with his name on her lips, and nights when the silence of her apartment pressed in on her until she could hardly breathe. Her friend Sophie tried to lift her spirits, taking her out for coffee, laughter, and half-hearted adventures that never quite felt real. "You did what you had to do," Sophie reminded her one evening as they walked along the riverfront. "He made his choice. You made yours. It doesn't mean it didn't matter." But Olivia could only smile faintly. Some loves didn't need to last to change you. Some simply left their mark and carried on living inside your soul. She told herself that Daniel had forgotten her, that he had moved on. But deep down, she knew that neither of them could ever go back to who they had been before each other. Across the city, Daniel Cross had become a ghost in his own empire. The scandal had died down after Olivia's departure, the board had restored its faith in him, and the business continued to thrive. Yet every success tasted hollow. His office remained immaculate, every document in its place, every schedule precise, but the empty desk by the window haunted him. He often caught himself glancing at it during late nights, expecting to hear her quiet typing, the soft hum of her voice as she answered calls, or the gentle laughter that used to fill the sterile air. Without her, the building felt colder, heavier, like a museum of past mistakes. He had done what he thought was right, what he believed would protect her. But the price was more than he had ever expected. The loneliness that had once been bearable was now unbearable. 6 months later, fate moved quietly, as it often does, weaving paths back together when least expected. It happened on a crisp autumn afternoon at a charity conference downtown. Olivia had been sent there by her new employer to manage event coordination for a nonprofit financial initiative. She was standing near the refreshments table, reviewing her checklist, when a familiar voice drifted through the room, low, controlled, unmistakable. Her heart froze before she turned. There he was, across the room, speaking to a small group of business leaders. Daniel Cross looked almost the same, yet different in a way that made her chest ache. The sharp lines of his face were softened by weariness, his eyes darker, more human. When their gazes met across the crowd, the noise of the event fell away. For one breathless moment, they simply stared at each other, the past rushing back like a storm. Neither moved at first. Then Daniel murmured a polite excuse to his group and began walking toward her. Each step felt slow, deliberate, as though he were crossing not just a room, but the distance of all the months between them. Olivia's pulse quickened. Part of her wanted to run, to flee from the ache of memory. But another part, the stronger part, stayed still, waiting. "Miss Hart," he said softly when he reached her, his voice calm but filled with emotion he could barely contain. "Mr. Cross," she replied, her tone equally measured, though her heart was pounding. For a moment, neither could find words. The air between them carried every conversation left unfinished, every moment that had been stolen by circumstance. Finally, Daniel broke the silence. "You look well," he said quietly. "So do you," Olivia answered, though she could see the exhaustion in his eyes. He gave a small smile. "I don't feel it." "Not since you left." Her throat tightened. "I didn't want to leave, Daniel." "You asked me to." "I know," he said, guilt flashing across his face. "And I've regretted it every day since." Olivia looked away, her fingers tightening around the folder in her hand. "Regret doesn't change what happened." "No," he admitted. "But maybe it can change what comes next." She turned back to him, uncertain. "What do you mean?" Daniel took a slow breath. "I built my life around protecting everything I thought mattered. My company, my image, my name. But in doing that, I destroyed the only thing that ever truly mattered to me. I let fear dictate my choices. I thought keeping you safe meant keeping you away, but all it did was leave us both alone." Olivia's eyes glistened. "You think saying that now makes it easier?" "No," he said softly. "But it's the truth, and I needed you to hear it, even if it changes nothing." For a moment they stood in silence, surrounded by the noise of the event that suddenly felt miles away. Then Olivia said quietly, "You can't just walk back into my life as if the pain never happened." "I know I can't," Daniel replied. "But maybe I can show you that it meant something, that you weren't just a moment of weakness in a lonely man's life. You were the reason I started living again." Olivia closed her eyes, tears threatening to fall. "You hurt me, Daniel. I hurt myself too," he whispered. "Every day without you has been a reminder of what I lost. I don't expect forgiveness, but if there's even a small chance to start over, to be something real without hiding behind walls, I'd give everything I have for it." His words hung in the air, heavy and raw. Olivia's chest ached with 1,000 emotions. Love, anger, longing, fear. Part of her wanted to believe him, to reach out and erase the distance between them, but another part still carried the wound of what had been done. "I don't know if I can," she said honestly. "I don't know if I'm strong enough to go through that again." Daniel stepped closer, his voice low but certain. "Then let me be the strong one this time." Something in his tone broke through her defenses. He wasn't the cold, untouchable CEO anymore. He wasn't the man of marble and rules. He was just Daniel, flawed, human, vulnerable. The man who had once lost everything and was now brave enough to ask for one last chance. Slowly, Olivia exhaled the breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "I don't know where to begin," she whispered. "Start with coffee," he said gently, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "It's how most good things begin." She almost laughed, a soft, trembling sound. "You still remember how I take it?" "Always," he said, his smile widening slightly. "2 sugars? No cream?" That small detail, that simple memory, broke the last of the distance between them. Olivia felt her heart soften, the years of tension melting into something tender. Maybe they couldn't erase the past, but perhaps they could build something new from it, something real, something earned. That evening, they walked together to a quiet cafe near the river. The city glowed in the twilight, the water shimmering with reflections of light. They sat for hours, talking, not about business or the company, but about life, loss, and everything that had changed them. Daniel spoke openly for the first time about his brother, about the grief that had hardened him, about the emptiness that success had never been able to fill. Olivia listened not as an assistant or an admirer, but as an equal, as someone who understood that even the strongest hearts can break silently. When they finally stepped outside, the night air was cool and gentle. Daniel turned to her, his expression soft. "I don't know what tomorrow will bring," he said quietly. "But I do know this. I won't let fear decide for me again." Olivia met his gaze, her eyes warm but cautious. "Then maybe tomorrow can be a beginning," she said softly. He nodded, and without another word, took her hand. This time, there was no hiding, no pretense, no walls between them. Only 2 people who had been broken, found each other, lost everything, and somehow found their way back again. The city moved around them, busy and bright, but in that moment, it felt as though time had paused to watch them heal. And somewhere deep inside her, Olivia realized that maybe the kiss that had once ruined everything had also saved them both. Because sometimes love doesn't arrive when life is perfect. Sometimes it finds you in the ruins, when all you can do is choose to begin again. The end.